Alexa, play Disruptive FM.
You'd like to listen to Disruptive FM, right?
Yes.
Press play. He's the voice of the intersection of marketing, tech, and popular culture. Thinking is his commodity. DJ, data punk, stylish sock collector, and author of the book Disruptive Marketing. Geoffrey Colon is your host of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds.
If it's Friday, it's another episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. This is episode 65, and I'm Geoffrey Colon.
And I'm Cheryl Metzger.
And we are really happy to be here, back for another new episode. And we are going to talk about a lot of different things on this particular episode. The crisis of leadership, disrupting of the disruptors, and sort of this revenge of the establishment. So this past week, the CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick, what can't go wrong with this company? They seem to be in the news so much, but I guess he was in an Uber himself, and I guess got caught saying some things to the driver. And, of course, there's a number of sexual harassment suits against the company, and there's sort of a cultural breakdown there and a number of things happening. But, Cheryl,
Yes.
What is this crisis of leadership, and why is it happening now in 2017?
Wow, such a loaded question. It's really interesting because I think one of the things that we're starting to see with this crisis of leadership is that it's driven a lot by speed. We talked about, or we've been talking about disruptive marketing for a long time. And this idea that's inherent in disruption, and we've been experiencing it really for the last 10, 15 years, is not just the fact of changing something, but changing it quickly. That's what really makes it disruptive. And I think we've seen a lot of technologies, a lot of startups, a lot of people who come kind of crashing into the scene, and they're radically disrupting everything. And we've all kind of raced to adapt and to adopt. And now we're finally at a time where we're looking back and saying, is this even a good idea? And so you go to someone who's a leader of a startup that takes on global proportions, becomes billion-dollar generator relatively overnight, at least with respect to other companies.
Yeah. So
you have a CEO who is not really experienced and tested in the same way that established CEOs have been, where they've had 30 years experience running a company, and it's sort of amateur hour when it comes to their character and their judgment and how well they've developed the culture of their company. And I think that's why we're seeing that leaders of disruptive technology, disruptive companies, disruptive movements are very much rough around the edges. They're bulls in china shops. And, we're now starting to question whether that's a smart idea or whether, they really need to take a page from their predecessors and from the old way of doing things and say, maybe there was something of value there.
I like this. I like the term leadership, and then I like comparing it to managing, because I think there's two. I think they're two very different terms. We hear a lot about people who are in management, and then of course it's like, oh, hey, they're on the leadership team. I mean, I hear that all the time here in Microsoft. Oh, that person's on the leadership team. I'm like, no, they're on the senior management team. There's a very big difference between a leader and a manager. What can we get at here when it comes to really understanding, the differences? And are we seeing now this breakdown because people are thinking that they can just manage their way through, these scenarios when we're really, yearning for people who can lead through these scenarios.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you talk about leadership versus management, because the two things that stand out to me about someone who's really a leader are having a point of view on something. Whereas, a manager is just sort of keeping everything together. It's sort of like I think of a project manager, for instance, it's really good at identifying detail, categorizing it, organizing it, but not coming up with a perspective on, what the future will look like and how things should move forward. Whereas a leader really has an opinion, has a perspective on the future, not the present. So really that point of view is one element I think that distinguishes them. But I also think one of the critical things about being a leader, especially in this day and age, is how well you listen to others. There is a lot to be said for that somewhat authoritarian leadership style that Steve Jobs, for instance, personified, where it's, he didn't really listen. He just kind of boldly pushed forward against this vision he had. So he had the first part of leadership. But I think, especially now where things are so complicated, being a good listener and then being able to find the insight in that listening and take action on that listening makes for a much more exceptional leader. And the reason I was sort of laughing to myself is because I was thinking about, you see the CEO of Uber in his Uber on video. And I thought of the comparison of that with Undercover Boss and how you had all of these traditional companies with traditional CEOs donning ridiculous wigs and and it became very formulaic. But the point was they were listening to the people in their company and they were listening to the customers and they were really being quiet and observing instead of just, bulldozing through something, versus the CEO of Uber who's in his own car, like in his own company, experiencing his own company, but instead of listening, he's arguing, he's fighting. So he wasn't doing what the undercover bosses were doing. And similarly did not have a tear-jerking ending to his little video story. But I feel like, especially, when we come back to this idea of being a disruptor, disruptors don't listen. Disruptors just push through. And I kind of think that now we're at a time, and actually this connects back to the partisanship that everyone has been feeling tense about, is we're all starting to realize we don't listen to each other. We only share points of view. We only have opinions now. And that balance is not being struck. So I think a leader in 2017 needs to have both.
Yeah. And this almost brings us to this point where, the disruptors are being disrupted. So you have a company that had high growth and it is now stabilizing. In some, areas of the world, it could probably continue to grow, but it's almost become mainstream. I mean, in a majority of cities, most of us take Uber and Lyft places. So, we may not own a car, or we take it to the airport, or we use it to get around. We may not use taxis anymore. We may not use mass transit. It's actually reshaped Los Angeles. Every time I travel to Los Angeles now, that city has been reshaped by Uber. But it's interesting because the people in a growth or a disruptive company work best when they are actually growing and challenging. But when you start to stabilize, that's a very different personality trait that's required. And I'm glad you brought up that listening is so important, because once you're grown and you're big, you don't need to be talking anymore. It's like the people on Shark Tank who keep selling when it's like, wait, you've already sold the deal. Now you got to just make the deal. Or it's like, a president who has been elected but still thinks, he's got to sell himself to, get elected. I mean, these companies, I think, need leaders who can listen. It's that ABL versus ABC approach, the always be listening versus the always be closing approach. We don't need Alec Baldwin telling, everybody, hey, you're a bunch of losers and we need to grow and we need to sell. No, you need the person who actually can say, hey, we need to actually make our technology better. We need to connect with our customers. We need to understand the issues that face us here in the culture. And, maybe a person who helped us grow exponentially, we hired them and looked past their past, grievances because we needed to grow fast, but that's not going to cut it in a sustaining environment. So do you think it's also because a lot of these companies are mainstream now, but they just don't, they can never sort of move away from that DNA of being, a disruptor?
I think, I think it's a brilliant point that the disruptors don't know when to stop being disruptors. It's almost like they haven't realized that they've won and that it now takes that shift. It's like, when are they going to pivot? That question that everyone is asking.
Yeah.
And it makes me think that, there's really a new model of leadership that I think could be really interesting, which is not to say that the disruptive leader becomes a different person, but that the disruptive leader needs to partner with an established leader and that they co-lead. I've thought before about is a vice president more like a co-president, and what an interesting model that would be to have, president with a disruptive mentality and a co-president with an established mentality, and how that could actually provide an interesting balance. And it brings me also to this idea of digital as a disruptor. And analog is, this were the established technologies and the traditional ways of doing things. And that there's really a great opportunity for those to work together instead of working at opposing, there doesn't have to be this opposition. There can actually be a really seamless integration. And I almost wonder if that's the turning point we're at now, where this idea of establishment versus disruptive is no longer at odds, but can actually co-lead towards something much better. In a digital environment or in a marketing context, I think it's looking at offline real world experiences and how digital can play an invisible but powerful role in enhancing those experiences. So you see things like Amazon opening a bookstore, Amazon opening a supermarket, but they're embedded with all of these great technologies that, help to connect you quicker, make the checkout experience more seamless. It's like they've learned from the efficiencies of digital and have embedded that into the real world to make the best of both worlds. And I think, we also saw recently, I know you had shared on LinkedIn, that Huge, which is a great digital agency in Brooklyn, that they started their own coffee shop. And the thought was that all of this great digital technology could be sort of invisibly embedded into that shop to provide an optimal experience. So if you have a coffee cup that has a sensor in it, it's going to let them know that you're running low on coffee and to serve you coffee again. So it creates this great customer experience by bringing the digital and bringing the analog together for a much higher quality type of real world experience.
So let's talk to our listeners a little bit more about, where we are right now. Are we at a point where understanding the analog experience, the physical world around us, is just as important as this digital architecture? And is that causing a lot of this craziness out there? Because the people who have built a lot of these big models were really digital by design. They were almost like 100%, digital in their DNA. And now they're having to realize, wait a minute, I have to actually understand people who use these experiences. Is that causing a lot of, craziness? Are we seeing sort of analog as the new black and seeing it roar back because, not because we have a Luddite movement out there, but people are actually expecting more than just, hey, the app works and this is a good, utility. But, really they want something more, human feeling when they're doing this. Is this also causing this crisis of leadership that we're facing on a daily basis?
Yeah, I certainly think so. I mean, I take one industry, obviously the industry I know well, which is advertising and marketing, and I think of just one element of it, which is audience insight. And I think to myself about how in the 60s, for instance, the Mad Men era, there was actually quite a lot of user research. Now, not users in the sense of user experience, but consumer research. And it was gained by actually talking to humans.
That's right.
And then with the advancement of digital technology, we were able to cheat and, get further and further away from humans. We could use data, we could use social listening, and it became the fast, easy, scalable way to supposedly get audience insights. And I think what we're seeing with those companies that have such a digital only mindset, that they've lost the nuance and color that comes from actually talking to people or from going into the real world and seeing how your company experience is actually playing out, or, seeing how your message is really resonating or not resonating with people. We've been hiding behind digital technology because it's efficient and because it's, easy. And I think that there is a reaction to that. And I think that is affecting leadership at these companies that have been kind of arrogantly digital only for a long time.
Yeah, you posted an article about how there are digital agencies, since this is the world we know so well, that are really moving more toward analog creative, or doing things that might be in the physical world, that they understand that these holistically need to be tied together. Mm-hmm. Do you think that this is almost like a revenge of the establishment, in the sense that the establishment was this sort of traditional or conventional way of thinking, one that I cut on a lot in my book in some respects. I was like, we don't need any, conventional thinkers. I didn't mean we don't need any analog thinkers or people who can't see sort of the world around them. But, is this a revenge of the establishment with what's going on, where we are almost marching a little bit backward, but that might be a good thing because we're trying to, really put, people front and center and, as you said, sort of move digital so it's part of the wallpaper.
Yeah, no, I definitely think there is, increasingly, we're not fully there yet, but increasingly, I think it is a revenge of the establishment. We were so quick to challenge it and throw it away and to mock it. And now we're seeing why it had been so established in the first place, because some of those things had been developed over a long time and had value and, had an impact. And it just makes me think at a larger scale that people forget that evolution is a messy process.
Yes.
It's kind of like the waves of an ocean, it goes up, it pulls back, it goes up, it pulls back. And that ebb and flow that we're going through right now is very natural, because I think we have a lot of change all at once, and now we're questioning that change. And now we're seeing maybe some of the things that were abandoned had value. Maybe some of the things that were abandoned don't have value. And I feel like what will result at the end of it is coming to this great balance between the two, where we say, okay, we've now discovered that some establishment qualities were really needed, and we can come back to them. It reminds me a little bit of the French Revolution. It was like you go from cutting people's heads off left and right to, going to a socialist state, which is what it is now. It's like the administrative state is now France, and which is, of course, as anyone who knows me knows, it's a country near and dear to my heart. But what a crazy ride to go from a populist uprising that beheaded a bunch of people to this placid, elegant, restrained administrative state. And that's because they realized there is some structure that we need for society to be successful. So I think that's when it comes to digital, when it comes to marketing, where we're in the thick of it right now, battling it out between, established or between like the deep embrace of digital technology and starting to return a little bit to things that feel tangible and human, to things that are more experiential instead of message focused. And I think also returning to talking to humans to get our insights. I do feel like that is going to be increasingly critical.
So there's almost like this digital truther movement out there. I mean, I don't know if these people wear tinfoil hats when they're doing their marketing, but they're almost rebelling against a lot of the digital metrics that we, collect and observe. Things like engagement, things like likes, etc., followers. They're almost embracing a metric that has really almost been a curse word with digital disruptors, but is, coming, I think, back in favor and has always been a term near and dear to the establishment, which is reach. The ability to have, mass reach, which for a long period of time, I think, the reason why in the digital world that was a bad word is, hey, I don't need to reach everybody. I just need to reach my audience. But we know that humans play in all these different areas. So if you say, well, I'm going to go after, this sort of subset of people and target them online with my marketing or advertising, you may be missing a large majority of your possible audience because they have a variety of other interests and they may not even list that interest, within their social signals, so to speak. So you can't even reach them. So we're almost moving back into this world of not really spray and pray, but hey, we have a message and we want to get it across, but we're not just going to micro-target to a small select group of people anymore. We're going to have this reach a variety of people. In that respect, it's almost like mass communication is roaring back, sort of, embracing all these learnings from the digital world, but, maybe packaging them in a way that, are acceptable to people because it is more of a collective journey. They're not necessarily talking at you. They're talking with you, but they're really trying to, to reach a large amount of people. But, in your, point of view, this revenge of the establishment, this sort of digital truther movement, I mean, what's that going to do, you think, over the next year, especially here in 2017, for leadership? And, what are the skills that, leaders should have in the here and now if they're really going to sort of, live, work, and breathe in this environment?
Well, I almost feel like going back to my point about bringing together the best of both worlds. I feel like if you're the leader of an organization and you're disruptive in nature, then find a partner that has more of an establishment mindset.
Yeah,
and
more
likewise,
stable. Yeah.
Yeah, and someone with more traditional experience or traditional points of view. And likewise, if you're that traditionalist, seek out someone who is disruptive in their mindset, partner with them.
I love that. I love that you mentioned that. I think that, I'm a huge fan of that co-CEO model. I mean, because I always have worked well in environments where I didn't have a number two. I never considered the person a number two. I considered them my equal because you can pass ideas back and forth. I mean, we see this a lot in the agency world, Cheryl, because you have creative directors that literally will say, "Oh, I only go as a package with my partner. This is a person I work with," and they'll literally turn down jobs if they can't go with the other person because they come as sort of a duo. And for a while, I was always like, I don't know if that makes sense. But then when you're in an environment where you do have an equal, where you can talk to that person, you can bounce ideas off of them, very similar to what you and I are doing on this podcast. I mean, that's a really refreshing way to look at the world because, as you said, if you're balanced, if you're not just always drinking the Kool-Aid together, but you're actually having those debates and that person has a different point of view because they have a different background than the other, I think that's really how companies should operate rather than this person, this one person at the top. But I digress. What are the skills, we need or people need to really sort of adapt to this new normal?
Well, if only I knew. I feel like I'm torn between a couple of things, but one, I think, is a mentality. So I'm cheating a little bit because it's not totally a skill. But it comes off the heels of me reading this book, which I think you may have recommended, that's embracing the value of messiness. And it's not the title of the book. I'll have to share that with listeners later. But I believe it's like the value of messy or the value of being messy. And the point is, going back to digital technology, we were lulled into this false sense that everything could be really precise.
Yes.
And everything could be perfectly timed and targeted.
Yes.
And everything, it could have this sort of scientific accuracy. And the messiness of the real world, the messiness of people, has to be embraced. The messiness of process, the messiness of innovation, the messiness of creative thinking, all of that has to be embraced as a mindset, which means experimenting. It means not being afraid to fail. It means, asking why not and challenging the way things are. So that's an element that leads to more of that disruptive mindset. But then I think from a skill set perspective, if we're pulling from the establishment, I think, it's looking at the traditional tactics and approaches that live in the real world. So that's to say face-to-face interactions, retail experiences, direct mail, any like product design, anything that it can be seen and touched and physically interacted with. Those are the touch points that I think leaders should be re-examining, because anything that's in the real world is real and anything that's digital is not real. And real matters quite a lot. So I would say embrace a mindset of messiness and focus on the touch points in the real world. And that's where you'll find a really great opportunity for innovation.
It's almost the opposite of what every, book has talked about the past couple of years, which is, you need to be more analytical and you need to be more process and efficiency driven. And here you are saying, going against the grain. That's why I love you, Cheryl. Be messy. Don't necessarily have process to everything and be human. I guess that's really, the good takeaway there. Which, I think at the end of the day, the good leaders, as you said, in this sort of new era, they're the ones that you feel like you can hang out with because they are real. They're honest. They tell the truth. Yeah. They admit that they, have, a shitty, life like we all do. Because
speak for yourself, Jeff.
I mean, I think what's really interesting though is, I got to see someone speak this past year who, said it best. They were, they're a working mom and they're a pretty powerful person in the tech industry. And they were like, I just hope that when I walk out of the house in the morning that I don't have like stains on my jeans from my, my kids. And that just made me like, I was like, I love this person because they're keeping it real. Like it's not all about being buttoned up and, I got everything in order and everything in control here. I mean, that's just not how life works. No matter how much we try to, I guess, bring software efficiency to everything. There's just, people live in this world and people cause chaos by living. And I guess that's what, how we sort of have to adapt to it. Well,
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it reminds me of when I was a very little kid, my room was covered in toys. My bed was covered in toys. My floor was covered in toys. And my mom said to me, just carve a path through your toys so that you can walk in your room. And that would be the advice I would give to a CMO right now is you're going to have toys everywhere. You're going to have chaos everywhere. Just try and carve a path to walk through it. So that, you're not going to ever wrangle in all of the chaos, but you just need a way through it. And that struck me as a great piece of wisdom. And the other piece of wisdom, as you were talking, that came to mind is Dave Chappelle taught us all that keeping it real can go wrong very, very quickly. And, I love his when keeping it real goes wrong, because I feel like that's kind of a great analogy for, disruptors kind of charging through and doing whatever they want and then realizing that doesn't fly forever. There's a time and place for it, but after a certain point, you can't, jump up in the middle of a meeting and shout Wu-Tang Clan like Dave Chappelle did and imagine that nothing else is going to happen from there. So those would be my 2 points of advice.
I'm going to try that Wu-Tang Clan chant in my next meeting and see where that gets me.
That's a good idea.
I might actually be posting on LinkedIn after that for new opportunities.
Right.
Cheryl, you always state it best. I think that's a good note to end on, which is the analogy of carve a path in that messiness and don't worry about keeping your entire floor clean.
Amen.
So with that said, where can we find you on, where can our listeners find you on Twitter?
I'm at The Real Cheryl M.
And I'm at DJ Geoffrey, Geoffe. You can also tweet to us at Disruptive FM. And we'll be back in probably 2 weeks. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, 2 weeks with a new episode. But in the meantime, keep the comments and the conversation coming. And you can always follow what we're doing using the hashtag Disruptive FM. It's another episode. I'm Geoffrey Colon.
And I'm Cheryl Metzger.
We'll catch you next time. You've been listening to Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds.
You've been listening to an episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. Remember to subscribe to the show on iTunes. Purchase a copy of Geoffrey's latest book, Disruptive Marketing, on Kindle, hardcover and audio. Signing off from the city of Seattle. Press pause.